Hello, good morning viewers. Welcome to the UGC CEC EduSet network, and we are running a series of lectures on Indian writing in English translation, and this writing starts from the ancient period and comes to the present century, the 21st century, and there is a huge number of texts and writers that have emerged in this time, and they have been given attention critically by us here under this series. We've covered so far authors from ancient period and the medieval period, and then the closer century, which is the 19th century. And now in the rest of the lectures, we'll be focusing upon writing in the 20th century, in English translation, of course. For this particular session, we have with us Dr. Payal Nagpal. She teaches English literature in Janaki Devi Memorial College, Delhi University, and she has done exclusive studies on modern drama, European drama and Indian drama. And today's subject of discussion is Vijay Tendulkar, the writer who emerged in the 1960s and 70s and made a name for himself. And he emerged as a very severe critic of social reality as it was unfolding in the post-independence period. And his writing is significant, it leaves an impact on us, and when he is staged, when his plays are put up on stage in different centers of culture in India, and they create a sense of unease, a sense of difficulty, sense of problem, and that is what the author is supposed to be doing in the present time. Today's lecture then would cover the dramatic works of Vijay Tendulkar in general, and I'm sure you will enjoy the discussion that is generated by Dr. Payal Nagpal in your minds, in our minds, and those who all those who would be listening to this lecture later. So welcome, Dr. Payal Nagpal, and I request you to present your view. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Prakash. As mentioned, today's lecture will be on the plays of the Marathi playwright Vijay Tendulkar. Some very, very important plays by Vijay Tendulkar: Silence the Court is in Session, Ghasiram Kotwal, Sakharam Binder, Kamla, Vultures, Kanyadan. He's a very, very important playwright of the post-independence period. And especially in the late 1960s and 70s, he really emerges as one of the most strong and powerful voices in the field of theatre that we have in India. So to begin with, if you look at his dates again, 1928 to 2008, somebody who was born in the pre-independence period and was able to contribute to modern India. And modern India, in a sense, that was also kind of emerging and was defining itself in various ways in the 1960s. So some of the plays that he had written in the early 1960s were plays such as The Walls Between, Nest of Wax, I Won, I Lost. These are Tendulkar's, in a sense, lesser known plays, and he was associated with experimental Marathi theatre of its time, and what was known as, understood as the avant-garde Marathi theatre. So, and it's very interesting that when he kind of looks at these plays in the 1960s, this is also the time period when in Europe particularly we have this entire tradition of theatre of the absurd in the 1950s. So in a sense he's totally in sync with what is happening in the world of theatre, not only in the context of India where he's understanding the social realities of India through the prism of theatre, but he's very familiar with what is happening in the world in the context of drama. So most of these plays that he writes, deal with a middle-class individual, a society that is at odds with the development of this individual, and how they are placed in a modern world, and the individual tries to make sense of a lot of these things. So, for instance, even when we look at the titles like I Won, I Lost, or Nest of Wax, or Walls Between, so there is this notion of how the individual, in a sense, responds to some of these things. again, when we really speaking look at his most important plays, for instance, we have Silence the Court is in Session. It's a play that is performed in the late 1960s, 1967, and it is a play which presents, in a sense, a kind of violence that is at some kind of subliminal level in the play. But when we look at the plays of the 1970s, it is potentially, not just potentially there, but it is there in a very big way, because he is now probably, as a playwright in the 1970s, he's presenting the ideas very boldly and is not retracting from kind of talking about the social reality the way it is. So this is at a time when we have some other very important playwrights. For instance, we have Girish Karnad, who writes in Kannada, and we have Badal Sarkar, who writes plays in Bangla, and we have Vijay Tendulkar, who writes in Marathi. But each of these playwrights actually looks at the idiom of theatre in a very, very different sort of manner. So where Karnad makes use of what he calls the myth, the idea of myth and how it is to be created in a play, here, it is more the tradition of the absurd theatre, the European tradition, and there is also the tradition of the naturalistic theatre. All these ideas are actually reworked, and Tendulkar is experimenting with these ideas in a sense. So he uses of the play, unlike Badal Sarkar, whose plays are meant to be performed in an open air theatre, or not even if it is the Angan Manch, it is not something that has a stage in that sense, but where an interaction between the audience and actors can take place. But in the case of Tendulkar, the proscenium is used and is used in a very, very sharp, precise manner. Very clear stage instructions that are given, and these stage instructions actually create the mood of the play. And even social realities, the social groups to which people belong, all that is created very well through his use of the stage instructions. So it's a very well crafted, in a sense, and a sustained realism, which of course takes violent turns. And this violence is Tendulkar, as a playwright, is presenting on stage the violence that is inherent in the society, and that is probably something that one does not see, maybe, or does not pay attention to, and he really expresses that very well on stage. So in Silence the Court is in Session, there's a female character at the center of it all, Leela Banare, and she defies the norms of the society, and it so happens that they are kind of trapped in this room. They cannot move out of the room, and that it leads to a kind of mock trial that happens. And this mock trial is a trial that is to be on infanticide, and it's very, very, this shift is very, very ironic, because it begins as a trial where the woman is being tried for infanticide, and it ends with a verdict that says that the society cannot allow Banare to keep her child, and the woman will survive, whereas the child will not. So and it is within these two shifts that the hypocrisies, the double standards of the people who belong to who come from various sections of the society are brought forth. And this play is particularly important because it ends with a soliloquy, a very long soliloquy by Banare, and we're talking about a play in the late 1960s, and here the kind of space that is given to the woman is very significant. One can easily think about Ibsen's Nora many years back, at the end of the 19th century, and I think in Banare he creates that female character who is able to express her views, who is able to articulate her problems, and this, in a sense, is the strength of Silence the Court is in Session, and a constant use of the judge, by the judge, of the term silence. Every time she tries to explain her point of view, the term silence is used, but at the end, this space that is given to the female protagonist in the play is very, very important. And here I would request Professor Prakash to share his views on this play, because I'm sure he's also watched lots of performances of Tendulkar's plays.
Uh, well, already you have made some seminal points about Vijay Tendulkar and the difficulty that Tendulkar has, and that's where he creates problems for us to think about. Is that the observer is the middle class individual, as you rightly say, and this middle class individual is very skeptical about what is happening in India at that time, and this middle class person is very angry also. That anger sometimes manifests itself, as you pointed out, in violence. And middle class individual knows that he is weak, that this person cannot make any difference to the world in which he lives. Therefore, violence in his case, as you say, would be subliminal. It would not be there openly to begin with. Later on, he might become open also, and then this middle class individual is replaced by another individual, again maybe closer to Tendulkar. And that's the point that struck me as quite significant in the case of this person. In silence, the court is in session, because the court belongs to the city, the court belongs to problems that are raised in the city. People come there and they feel quite safe in the hands of the court, but then there are individuals in the court, and those individuals then offer a kind of application of what is happening outside in the urban centers. So this is how I look at it, and
Yes.
I believe that you will be talking further about this and
Yes.
what other things.
Yes. So this is absolutely true that there is the characters are in a sense presented. They are people who are there in the society, and they are kind of a part of the courtroom scenario. And so the courtroom scenario in that sense is a revelation, and one sees how people behave in the world, and how they are in a sense revealed through this mock trial that happens. And if we look at it, so for instance in Benares Soliloquy, she mentions these two incidents of love within quotes, and she says that in both it is the body that remains important for the people that she was in love with. And she says that one, of course, is very early when she was about 14, and it's an exploitative relationship. It's the mother's brother, and the second time it is the Professor Damle. So she says that this is a quotation from Benares Soliloquy in the play. He was a man for whom everything was of the body, for the body. That's all. Again the body. This body is a traitor. I despise this body and I love it. I hate it, but it's all you have in the end, isn't it? So this recognition of the materiality of existence, this recognition of the materiality of existence by a woman is really very, very significant. It's an important point that Tendulkar is really making here. And
Dr. Nagpal, when you are talking about the reality and the materiality of the body, so which means that the starting point for Tendulkar is the body, the reality that is actually there in society, and that if there are ideas, then those ideas emanate also from the experience of the body.
Yes.
Would you agree?
Yes. So much so that she probably Leela Benares does not even realize that the first relationship is an exploitative relationship in that sense, and in the second one too, she thinks that now this is a more mature relationship, whereas that too turns out to be as exploitative maybe as the first one. Only the parameters of exploitation are very different, and in both cases, it's the whole idea of the body is both an assertion, and yet at the same time it is also a means through which the woman in a sense stands victimized.
Is the subject of hypocrisy coming in this case?
Yes.
How? I mean, could you explain how it comes? Hypocrisy.
Vis-a-vis Benares, or in the larger context of the play?
Larger context.
Larger
Yes.
context of the play, yes, because the very fact that this is a play that is meant to kind of talk about, it begins as a mock trial about infanticide. The woman is to be tried for that. And the final verdict that is given is very interesting. And I'll just read this quotation out. And the verdict is that the crimes you have committed are most terrible. There is no forgiveness for them. Irresponsibility must be chained down. Social customs, after all, are of supreme importance. Marriage is the very foundation of our society's stability. So the final verdict is that she shall live, but the child shall be destroyed.
Oh, really?
Yes, this is the final verdict. And it is a play that begins by talking about infanticide, but where, of course, Benare is extremely uncomfortable, and it turns out to be a trial that, really speaking, exposes, the life of Benare.
Which means that unreality is, in a way, covering reality, and this gap between unreality, that somebody is to be destroyed and somebody else is to live, is a kind of reality-unreality combination.
And in fact, I don't even know if it is unreality and reality, because I think what Tendulkar is finally saying through these two shifts is, the play beginning as a mock trial about something else and turning out to be a mock trial of Benare. I think Tendulkar is clearly saying that the society, in a sense, will to kind of preserve its customs, is not going to spare anyone. And it is Benare who wants to preserve the child. She does not want to abandon the child.
And the middle class individual is choked, is destroyed himself, but the reality has to continue.
And there is consensus, in a sense, that is built up in the play regarding a verdict of this sort. And how custom and how social institutions are so very important, and everybody either believes in them or is expected to adhere to them.
Even when these social customs go against the individual initiative.
Not only initiative, but against human life as such, in this case. And Benare has totally defied all these norms.
And this is the middle class India in the 1960s.
This is the middle class India in the 1960s.
Where this gap between ideals and the gap between reality exists and is shown to be the case in this play.
Yes.
It's a very powerful social play.
It's a very powerful social play. And in the 1960s, to have a figure like Benare, I think that itself was a very bold act.
How was it received at that time, 1960s? Must have created a furor.
I think all of Tendulkar's plays, really speaking, created a lot of furor. And in fact, he says that there are plays for which he was, slippers were hurled at him, and of course he was later awarded, and all sorts of honors had been bestowed on him. So, but the one thing that a consistent strain, I must say, in all of Tendulkar's plays is this act of, it's a brave act in a sense. And he does not ever kind of, try to make everything seem amiable, or he does not try to make the audience feel very comfortable, in a sense, about what he's really speaking, presenting there on stage. On the contrary, he presents things as bare facts, as bare as they are in real life. And he says, when in real life this is what is happening, then one needs to present it in the same manner on stage. He doesn't kind of, sugarcoat it and present it to the audience. So we move to another play by Tendulkar, which is called Sakharam Binder, and it's a play that was written in 1972, performed in 1972, and it totally attacks the system of marriage and patriarchy, both. So there is the character Sakharam Binder, and it's interesting that Tendulkar in one of his own lectures mentions that he had heard of this character called Binder, a binder somewhere, and he entered into what were called contract marriages, and it was not a formal legalized marriage, but women who had been abandoned by their husbands, he would actually enter into a contract marriage with these women, and it was an arrangement, so the woman could stay on for as long as she wanted, and after that she could leave. And this information that he had about a particular person in real life becomes, really speaking, the protagonist of this play Sakharam Binder. And along with kind of attacking the institution of marriage through this character of Sakharam Binder, it also, more importantly, attacks the whole structure of patriarchy and shows how even outside of marriage, even in this context of a contractual relationship that Sakharam Binder enters into with the other women, it remains equally exploitative for these women. Be it the two women in this play are Lakshmi and Champa. So be it Lakshmi, be it Champa, both women are in a sense exploited in different ways. So Sakharam Binder, is, as I said, is a play that was performed in 1972, and he's looking at it begins with Sakharam Binder getting Lakshmi into his house and telling her of the rules and regulations, and the kind of power that he makes very explicit in the very first scene where he's got Lakshmi to his house for the first time, he's in a sense just laying down the rules, in which it is very clear that she has to adhere to all the rules. She has to follow all the expectations that Sakharam has of her, and she's being informed of the kind of what she's going to be given in return, and she has the saving graces that whenever she wants, she can leave this place and go. So the women are supposed to feel happy because they have shelter, they have male protection, and in it, the two different forms of these women. Lakshmi is a conventional woman, and once Lakshmi is thrown out of the house, there is Champa, who's younger and more given to the pleasures, and the idea of fantasy is brought in. So where he remains, he's shown to be a rather leading a rather stable life, if one can call it, with Lakshmi, almost bordering on a kind of matrimonial relationship. He's seen as extremely anarchic and unstable, irresponsible, bizarre with Champa. So and if we just look at the first lines that he uses when he gets Lakshmi home, he says, "When I lose my temper, I beat the life out of people. I have a foul mouth, and there's always an oath on my lips." So he's in a sense, this kind of machoism that he exhibits to Lakshmi.
This is how husbands behave. This is what they think.
Exactly.
And that is brought into the open by the writer.
But this is not a matrimonial relationship. It is a relationship. It's a contractual relationship. It's an arrangement, and it's not marriage. These are women, and in a sense, I think Tendulkar is way ahead of his times. He's asking a very important question, that what is the kind of life that these women who have been abandoned by their husbands, who have been left. Now, what do these women do? If they enter into a contractual relationship of this sort, let's say with, for instance, this character, Sakharam, so who is probably as machoistic, as patriarchal as the figure of the husband. That, power equation between the man and the woman, really speaking, does not change. It might acquire a different form, with the only saving grace being that she can leave when she wants.
And if the person is not working, if the person doesn't have any other place to go to, then she'll be bound to the marriage with this binder.
Yes, that is why it is.
Who's a binder? There's a play on the word.
Absolutely, there is a complete play on the word binder. And this is the case with Lakshmi, because what happens is that when she gets used to this life, and she also feels, she understands that she's being exploited totally. She's being made to do all the housework, and it's all very tough and arduous, but she does all of that. And she finally, it reaches a point where she says that there's probably absolutely no strength left in her. And at which point, of course, she's asked to leave. She's thrown out of the house. So be it beating the woman, be it using foul language, so everything, Sakharam does all those things. So it's a double-edged thing. At one level, Sakharam, in a sense, presents the persona of the husband, and yet at the same time, he takes great pride in the fact that he is not the husband. But at the same, which is where this whole play about a kind of power equation that exists in society between men and women, that is really speaking brought to fore. So and Lakshmi is not really able to, and the whole mindset of how women are also conditioned in patriarchy. So Lakshmi, who is the conventional one, tolerates everything for as long as she can, and once she's thrown out, she kind of is away for a bit. When Sakharam gets Champa home, who's the younger woman, and who's thoroughly exploited physically by Sakharam, and finally Lakshmi, who has absolutely no place to go to, comes back to this house. And she also comes back to this house because she tells Sakharam that she says, "I have worn this around my neck in your name," suggesting that she considers herself to be married to Sakharam. And she distinguishes herself from Champa in a very interesting manner. She says that Champa has left her husband. So there is Champa's husband is also part of the play. So however, she has left the husband. So Champa is a different kind of woman in this sense, and as mentioned that she's younger to Lakshmi, but Lakshmi has been abandoned by the husband. So in Champa's case, this element of choice is, we are in a sense looking at two generations of women. So in Champa, this element of choice of leaving the husband, which of course requires sheer grit, is there, which of course for Lakshmi is unthinkable. And Champa also has relations with Sakharam's friend. So she looks at it, but Sakharam is not able to take that when he finally gets to know from Lakshmi about Champa's relationship with his friend. He kills Champa at the end of it all. And Lakshmi, who is now to play the dutiful wife, and she finally is going to be able to exercise control over Sakharam because of this act of his, decides to hide and cover up this act by burying Champa. So it's the way in which patriarchy functions, and it's not something that's related to the men alone. Also, the way in which Lakshmi perceives herself and her relationship with Sakharam is something that exists within the purview of marriage, so to say. So it may not be something that is a formal act that is performed, a social act that is performed, but it's a contract. But for Lakshmi, it is as sanctimonious as marriage itself, which is why she goes right to the end and decides to kind of preserve Sakharam. But and how she looks at Champa as somebody who is not the right kind of woman, because she is not, kind of paying any attention to her husband, who keeps coming to Sakharam's house to meet Champa, but she refuses to meet him. So there's this very, very interesting dynamic. And Tendulkar surely thought way ahead of his times when he saw how patriarchy, kind of conditions the minds of both men and women, and how this whole question of, if a woman wants to exist outside of marriage, how does she do that? For example, Champa's statement here is very important and enlightening. She says that, but your Sakharam, she tells Lakshmi, he really takes his money's worth out of a woman. So I've managed to last out here. What else can I do? Go out in the streets? Face half a dozen animals every day? Easier to put up with this one. So Champa is very clear about why she's staying with Sakharam. Yet at the same time, even Champa's, who has left her husband, is staying with Sakharam. Her realization that the world outside is a bad one, and it is going to be impossible for her to survive. This is, in a sense, a very important realization.
Viewers, we have 2 points made very succinctly by Dr. Payal Nagpal. One is regarding infanticide and hypocrisy attached to it, and the second about matrimony. And these 2 plays that Tendulkar wrote in the late 60s and 70s, these plays bring out into the open the actual reality of the time, which is full of violence. And this is the end of the first part of the lecture, and the second part we will be hearing more from Dr. Payal Nagpal about other plays. Till then, thank you. Friends, welcome back to the lecture, the second part. And before I request Dr. Payal Nagpal to speak further, let me tell you that towards the end of the lecture, that is at 10:50 precisely, you can ask questions, you can raise issues here with Dr. Payal Nagpal and other viewers of the play. So at 10:50, you will have a chance to express your opinion, and you can call us up this number. 1-800-110-430. It's a toll-free number, and when you call up, then we can take up the issue, and then Dr. Payal Nagpal will be requested to, and she'll be glad to respond to your questions. So, Dr. Payal Nagpal, please begin your lecture.
So, in the previous lecture, we discussed two important plays by Tendulkar, Silence the Courtesan Session and Sakaram Binder. In this lecture, we will be looking at two more plays, Vultures and Ghasiram Kotwal, and also looking at Tendulkar's own views on theatre. So if we look at the play Vultures, again a play that was performed in the early 1970s. So it takes as its beginning point, starting point, a family. It's a middle class family, and of course the whole ideas of the proscenium stage and so on. But how this family is totally, extremely lost, in the sense that they will go, there are these two brothers, Ramakant and Umakant, and there is sister Manik. There is the figure of the father, Papa, but they will do anything to get money, and they want to acquire more and more money as a family. So, and gradually it's more about each individual in this family wanting to acquire more and more money. So where there were these two brothers to begin with, Papa and his brother, and he had of course cheated his own brother and had made a lot of money. So finally, the two, his children, that is Ramakant, Umakant and Manik, they want the father's money, and they will go to any extent to even hitting the father. And when the moment they realize that he still has a lot of money stashed somewhere, they immediately want to attack him or corner him in a way that he transfers all the money in his name. And the figure of the father, in that sense, the Papa, is at the end of it, he's left very alone and desolate, and he goes to his illegitimate son, Rajninath, who stays in the garage there. The only sensitive voice in this play, there are in fact two sensitive voices. One is of a woman, Ramakant's wife, Rama, and she is her relationship with the illegitimate son, that is Rajninath. And Rajninath is someone who stays in the garage. He's not entitled to, of course, all the facilities and luxuries that the rest of the family has. And he writes poetry. So there is a kind of sensitivity, and the poems that he writes, in fact the play begins with poetry that's written by Rajninath. So it sets the tone, and it also tells us the title of the play being Vultures, and how the notion of preying on someone. So there is this constant idea of the predatory relationship that exists amongst people in society. For instance, the two brothers and the sister preying on the father to begin with, and then the two brothers attacking the sister then. And she has a relationship with somebody who's very rich. He's supposed to be the prince somewhere, and they want the money out of him, which of course they do not succeed in, because the sister is pregnant. They think they can use this to kind of make more money. When that does not work out, they also want to torture the sister, who in turn then wants to torture the brother's wife. So there is a kind of web that is created here, and the only sensitive woman at every point when the situation becomes extremely intense and violent. In fact, violence is both implicit and explicit. Implicit in the sense that the one thing that the society rests itself on is relationships within the family, but there is a kind of violence that is inherent in these relationships. So implicit there, but in this play it is also very explicit. Violence of various kinds. There's verbal violence, there's violence at the level of relationships, and there is actual physical violence that is used when it comes to Manik or when it comes to Papa and so on. So unlike earlier plays, where he may have, Tendulkar may have focused, especially in the early plays, on the individual, there is this intense realism that exposes the reality of middle class society. And these are people who have a certain stature in society. These are people who are able to exercise their own will in a certain way in the society. So, and with this, and how Manik, who's a woman, it's not something that is how in a sense patriarchy and this idea of acquiring more money, these two things combine in a sense, and they totally demolish this the kind of sensitivity that is to be there in the family, or the understanding that is to be there. So that structure stands demolished. And in a sense, Tendulkar is throwing it at the face of the audience and saying that if this is what you thought that the institution of the family is, it certainly is not, because there is a kind of violence and individual acquisitiveness that is there, and it is further reduced because as I said that to begin with, the three children, that is the two brothers and the sister, they attack the figure of the father. Then the two brothers attack the sister, and then there is a conflict between the two brothers. And towards the end, of course, Rama and both Rajinath are missing. What happens, one does not know. But what is more important, or what is central to Vultures, is this idea of the effect of the predatory effect existing within the institution of the family, and how social institutions in that sense are kind of based on this. And it's a very, very strong comment, I think, that Tendulkar is making through this play, and he's exposing the stark reality in that sense that exists in the society. Here again, I would request Professor Prakash also to share his views, especially on this play Vultures.
Actually, Vulture takes a different take on relationships in society, as I see it from your description. In the earlier plays, particularly in Sakharam Binder, he was talking about marriage. He is not talking about marriage here. He is talking about family. And as soon as the family comes in, you pointed it out, then it became a means of getting more and more money. So it's not relationship at all. Actually, this is using the relationships to extract as much money as possible. So there is a kind of cynicism that is there at the root of society, at the root of the family. So family that way is coming under attack in a different sense. What do you say?
Yes, completely. And in fact, marriage is not really speaking the prime issue, but it is this kind of acquisitiveness, this idea of wanting to acquire more and more, and to take whatever is there with each of these people who are part of the family structure, to take everything away from each one of them. So it in that sense diminishes to the individual. For instance, the children wanting everything from the father, then the children fighting amongst themselves, and then finally the two brothers who are left, and they too are squabbling over the money.
So the reality is economic now.
Yes.
In the sense, that whatever way you can get money out of things, you get it. And well, there are a large number of families in India today, which play an important role in the economic structure. Families, run business. It's a question of combination of relations and money, and whatever way money comes, that is good enough. So it's that way. He's getting more and more structural now than ideological. It's not marriage, but it's the way one gets money out of other people.
And how one might think I think what Tendulkar is also saying here is that one might think that family is in a sense a refuge from all this that exists in the society. He says family is as affected by this kind of an economic reality as everything else. And in fact, if you look at Vultures, it is the site in a sense of this kind of transaction being carried out and enacted.
So which means money is blood smeared. There is a lot of blood shedding, on the stage. I watched this play, and the child is aborted on the stage itself of the sister. So if money, involves this kind of blood curdling kind of reality, then it's a different take. I think he's going totally against the idea of capitalism, the idea of idealism that is always as the target of people's behavior.
And I'm also wondering now that, for instance, when we move from, the 1960s to the 1970s, I think this whole idea also, I mean, so many years in post-independence India, and the idea of an emerging nation and so on. So the whole idea that one needs to now rethink the values on which one is basing oneself, and rethink the values on which maybe family or marriage, all these ideas are to be looked at, which is why I think his plays of the 1970s are more powerful. And in fact, this particular play, Vultures, is absolutely acerbic and very, very bitter about the kind of realities that are there in society. And Tendulkar is making a very strong case for rethinking the way we position ourselves, I think, in the world. So
you call it intense realism, and this is what it is.
Yes.
It's intense realism.
Intense realism. Intense realism, and I think Tendulkar very clearly also wants to disturb the audience. He wants the audience to understand that he wants to push them out of their comfort zones. So, they stay in their own niche areas and so on. He says that is not going to work any longer, because what you have here now is, a system that is very, very harsh and is very cruel, which is why, especially in Vultures, and as the title of the play itself suggests, the whole predatory relationship that exists, I think the violence is implicit, it is explicit, it permeates every aspect of the play, because it permeates every aspect of the society. And he says that this is the violence that we do not really want to acknowledge that exists around us. So in this play particularly, I think some of the ideas that are presented, and the kind of love that otherwise one would expect between, let's say, the parent and the children, or amongst the children, all that is done away with, because it is ruled and regulated by the sheer financial aspect. So
what is predatory relationship? Can you explain it a bit?
In the sense that the one who is more powerful is going to prey on the one who is the less powerful one. For instance, if we look at it in this way, the two brothers and the sister, they first attack the father. The father is less powerful, he's old now, he does not hold that kind of authority. And when that aspect is ruled out, then if you look at the children, the two brothers against the sister. And then finally the brothers against each other.
Relations are destroyed then?
Relations are destroyed
yes.
then. So that's the predatory relationship. So with this we move on to a very, very popular, much acclaimed, much performed play by Tendulkar, which is Ghasiram Kotwal. And I think, it's before we even begin a discussion of Ghasiram Kotwal, it's very important to understand Tendulkar's own views on this play, because he says that Ghasiram, being a very minor character in our history, no authentic and detailed material on the man was available. The theme is not historical, but contemporary and universal. This is a very important point for us, because what he's saying is that he's not just looking at Ghasiram, the historical figure from the Peshwai period, but he is looking at the making of Ghasiram. In fact, in his Sri Ram Memorial Lecture, he states that very clearly. He says there are many Ghasirams in the society. So how does Ghasiram, really speaking, come about? Who makes these Ghasirams? And what happens to them then? And the relationship, in a sense, between the person, the individual, and the state is something that is brought out very significantly through this play. And he says that it's not the historical figure that he is really interested in, but how these figures are, really speaking, created in the modern world, in the world, in the India of the 1970s. He's talking about that. So in a sense, the idea of the state, its machinations, its cruelty, the powers, how Ghasiram, who to begin with is a Kannauj Brahmin, and he's supposed to be this very, very, they have an amiable, congenial sort of behavior, and how when he's insulted and humiliated by the powers that be, when he's arrested and so on, he decides to take revenge. And he decides to kind of, get back at the system. Now, this whole process of getting back at the system, and how he puts his own daughter at stake, and he finally cannot come to terms with it. And at the same time, the kind of, corrupt system at the head of which is Nana himself. That is something that is really speaking exposed, and how there are these levels. So where he's the Kotwal in that sense, and there is somebody who exists who's the deputy, who is Nana, who is his superior, and then there is a Peshwa who is even his superior, and so on. So how there are these different layers in society, and how power actually permeates through these different layers. How the ordinary people, how the women particularly are in a sense kind of taken within this system and are thoroughly exploited. The instance, of course, being Ghanshiram's own daughter. And he himself, in a sense, kind of puts her at stake so that he can wreak revenge and havoc on the society of the times. So this, in a sense, it's a multi-layered, very, very complex sort of play. In fact, that's one of the things that Tendulkar says, that the kind of reality that he's talking about, even in his lectures and so on, he says he might explain it very simply. He says, but the reality is not simple at all. It's a very complex reality. So if we look at Ghanshiram Kotwal in this context, then the idea of the state, the idea of the individual, the idea of the deputies, the powerful people who represent the state in that sense and are destroying it, and the ordinary citizen who is caught in all this, who is pushed to a point where he kind of shows a kind of aggression that destroys him, that destroys people around him, and that will lead to naught. Because at the end of it all, Ghanshiram himself is somebody who's abandoned by the system, in fact thrown out, and he's going to be he's stoned by the people, and he's not able to kind of survive this ordeal. So what is really speaking, what are the kind of freedoms that people have, and how is violence and aggression kind of perpetrated on people through a system that exists in the society. So these are some very, very significant points that he makes, and Tendulkar states this very clearly. He says that he's not interested in any one Ghanshiram, but what he's interested in is how are these people created in the society. That for him is a kind of telling point. And again, here I would want to discuss this play with Professor Anand Prakash, because I'm sure he's watched many performances of Ghanshiram Kotwal, and is a play that I think touches us as much today as it did then.
No. You see, the crux of your lecture today is that the society is not worth living in. It is to be totally changed. And that raises the question whether this person, this writer, this sensitive soul among us has any answers to give to the problems existing. Mm-hmm. Does he have any answers in the place, Dr. Parnakwa?
He has no answers, because I think what Tendulkar is also saying is, if you look at Ghanshiram Kotwal or Vultures particularly, what he's saying is that the system has deteriorated to such an extent that it cannot be. There can be no easy solution to this.
Is there a kind of cynicism in the play, that nothing is possible, that there is no solution possible at all?
I think for me to say that as a playwright, whether he's being cynical about it and is not able to track solutions, I think more than that, Tendulkar's, as a playwright, as a writer, his thrust is on exposing the reality. Mm-hmm. And I think he stops there to actually figure out what that solution can be, and what that social reality in the context of a solution can be. He does not head there, because I think his purpose is to show the audience that this is what the real world is all about. The world that you come from, you come to watch a play, you come with certain notions, you think that the world is a certain kind of place, but he says it is not that place.
Is it not my right as a spectator to know from the author as to what the answer is? Because I pay for the play, I go there, and I find through him that this world is not worth living in. Where do I go for guidance?
Well, that is an answer that Tendulkar does not provide us with. Mm-hmm. In fact, he is, as I said, that he stops there. For him, just exposing the stark reality, as stark as it is, there is nothing finally that he leaves at the subliminal level. For him, presenting that on stage is more important. So he says that, even characters that are, for instance, Ghanshiram Kotwal will be a historical character, but he says he's not interested in that aspect. But how that minor character from history remains relevant even in the India of the 1970s, or let's say even today. I think that is the point that he's making. And of course, Tendulkar does not give us solutions, and he does not kind of tell us, which is the route that we are to take. But he certainly shows us that the route that we have been following so far is certainly not the route on which we can head any further. Because that is a route that has given us a society that is extremely acquisitive by nature and really speaking leads us nowhere.
It is also at the same time inherent in the place, inherent in the structure that he offers, that this disaffection, this dissatisfaction, and this kind of illusion that is created in us. This illusion is to be shed, and that the heroes of the modern theatre are actually the masses, and it's these masses will then have to think as to how this system in which we live is supposed to be replaced by another system. So maybe the author doesn't have an answer, maybe the audience also doesn't have the answer, but the answer is somewhere. After all, it's art, which makes us intensely aware about reality.
I think in that sense, more than Tendulkar, Badal Sarkar provides us with that, because the whole idea of Badal Sarkar's third theatre being the concept that he takes right to the masses, is a way of actually sensitizing people, and not only people who come to the auditorium to watch that play, because a lot of Tendulkar's plays would be kind of more relevant in a sense on the proscenium. I mean, be it Vultures, not Ghanshiram Kotwal, because Ghanshiram Kotwal would kind of need a different kind of stage space, and it's a musical in that sense. There's a lot of it's performance oriented totally. So whereas other plays are more akin to the proscenium style. So of course they can be taken from the proscenium and they can be adapted elsewhere also. But what is very, very significant here is this whole idea about how Tendulkar is able to kind of tell the audience that this is where you are coming from. And I think that's where he kind of, in fact, if we now move on to Tendulkar's understanding of theatre, he says it's very different from as mentioned, from his contemporaries. For instance, Karnad and his use of the myth, there is a kind of vision, there is a kind of clarity which is very different in the case of Karnad, whereas in the case of Badal Sarkar it's again very different. And of course we also have another playwright of this period, which is Mohan Rakesh. So Tendulkar decides, however, to make the audience extremely uncomfortable, and here he takes on, and one has to acknowledge that these are developments that happen abroad in the 1950s, if we look at theatre of the absurd. But in the 1960s and 70s, pretty much Tendulkar is able to take on what is happening in the West, and he is able to experiment, reorient it in the context of Indian theatre. And he uses techniques that much earlier Pirandello would have used. He uses techniques of Arthu, he uses techniques of theatre of the absurd, and he talks about how in a performance of Ionesco's Chairs, to begin with, he was extremely disappointed, and he wondered, dialogues that do not lead anywhere, dialogues that do not make sense. How can these dialogues hold the attention of the audience? But once the performance actually happens and he's way into the rehearsals, he realizes that the name might be absurd theatre, but the technique is not absurd in that sense. There is a well crafted technique that lies at the bottom of it all, and is able to kind of present itself in a certain manner. So in fact, talking about his very early experiences of theatre, what he calls the mystique of theatre, he speaks about his own father and brother and how they were engaged as actors in amateur productions, and his father had also directed some amateur productions. He talks about the time when men were performing the roles of women, and what's interesting here, which of course a lot of other people would have also encountered, but what was interesting was when Tendulkar watched these rehearsals. So men who with their moustaches and so on in the rehearsals would, without any female costume or makeup, be practicing the female roles. and how that allowed him to imagine characters differently and look at them. It kind of extended the boundaries of imagination to be able to understand how a performance can take place. And this is very significant because he says that, he's a writer first, then a playwright, and then maybe somebody who's also kind of engaged with films. So he says that, I act as I write. In my mind, I emote the lines of the characters as I write. I hear those lines being emoted, and I write them as I hear them. Which means that for Tendulkar, I think what's very, very important is the idea that the writer, the playwright, should also be, to his mind at least, a kind of performer. So that, and he says that, he can actually perform a lot of these roles much better than the actors themselves, because while he is writing, he reads out the lines of each character, and he, in a sense, kind of, to himself thinks about what the performance can be like. And that's why he says that, consider the innumerable and contradictory characters in my play. He says, I can do it better than others because I have acted my plays out once I write them. So the realism that he is able to bring out is a realism that emerges from his understanding of theatre and his interaction with his own characters. And of course that for him is very interesting, because he says to begin with he's led by these characters, but gradually, in a very Pirandalian sort of way, he says that, but gradually he is able to overcome that, and he is able to give, in a sense, a certain kind of direction. And if we understand, his idea of realism, again, I would refer to what Tendulkar says about it himself. He says that I never had a single living person in my mind as my character. The final product was a combination of many things which cannot be related to one single person in real life. So this idea, the creative process as complex and as, kind of emerging from complex processes that are there in society and not referring to any one or two characters, is a very, very important aspect of Tendulkar's plays. So I think with this we need to just understand that Tendulkar's plays are able to present the harsh realities of the society the way they are, absolutely in a stark manner on stage, so that the audience too confronts these realities and is able to, where the playwright might not provide any easy solutions to these issues, but the audience is certainly going to be is going to be dislodged from its comfort zone to think about these issues.
Well, thank you, Dr. Payal Nagpal, for this very comprehensive lecture in which you extensively talked about the 4 plays in that order, starting from Sakaram Binder and finally coming to Ghaziram Kotwal. And the last play that you discussed focused upon the state structure, and it's the state that is important, which means that Tendulkar is a critic of the structures in society, and those structures have to be rethought, the word that Dr. Payal Nagpal used. I think it's a lecture that gives us a lot of food for thought, and about society we have to reconsider many things that are established already, but then they have to be reworked in a manner that society meets our demands. So with this comment, I come to the end of the lecture, and I thank Dr. Payal Nagpal for this very comprehensive treatment of the subject that you gave us. And viewers, you can think about these issues, and you can get back further to us for further clarifications. Till then, thank you very much.